We're covering the bad guys.
The bad guy. That sounds like a bad film.
Yeah, well, it's actually entertaining in different ways, right?
Yeah, it's a lot of fun.
And by the way, if you're just kind of wondering why the name Tilt Shift, you're not familiar with us, go check out Season 1, Episode 1. We'll give you a great breakdown there. But yeah, we're excited about this first show, first movie, right?
You didn't want to tell him because you can't remember why?
No, I don't know. I thought I knew.
Well,
It's kind of complicated. Go back to
can you tell us, Tim? No,
I could, but we got to get to the show.
We do.
All right, yeah, so this it's rated PG because of action and rude humor. You know, it's an animated film, and you get a lot of that in animated films today. But it is a lot of fun in many ways. There's it's sort of a heist movie, kind of like the Ocean's 11.
It's definitely
type
have the
of thing.
Ocean's 11 feel.
Yeah, but it's shot like an action film, so it's not like most animated films, and it's got some characters that are a lot of fun. They're animal. The main characters are animals.
Right.
So you got the animals
course
that are the villains in all the stories. So you got wolf, you got a
Gotta have a
spider.
snake.
Yeah, snake.
Right.
My wife's favorite, snake.
Snakes. Why did it have to be snakes?
Then you got a piranha and
And a great white shark.
yeah, and a shark. That's right.
Shark
And that's
has to
just
be
their
the
names,
villain.
Wolf and
Right.
shark and tarantula. And then almost everybody else in the film is a human, other than like the governor is a fox, and
Right.
then this Professor Marmalade is like a little guinea pig or something.
Yeah.
And then most of the rest of the characters are human, so it's kind of a weird world.
It works as you watch it, though.
Yeah,
It really does.
But one of the things that's interesting, there's a lot of discussion about. I'm going to say human nature, even though they're not human, but about
the animals do represent humans,
yes.
right? Yeah.
So are they good or are they bad? Do they have to be one or the other?
Does environment determine what you become?
Yeah, it's kind of
Those
like a
sorts
nurture
things?
versus nature type of
Right.
thing, and
Yep.
then there's a lot of discussion about that. So we're going to be checking out a lot of that. Why don't we jump into the first
clip? The first clip of the new season.
Here we go.
All right.
This is an introduction to the characters.
But when you're born us, you don't exactly win many popularity contests. Do I wish people didn't see us as monsters?
8 legs, 8 times the cardio.
Sure I do. What's up?
That would be me.
But these are the cards we've been dealt, so we might as well play them.
Jackpot. What the thorax?
Are you crazy?
What? I just wanted a longer car chase. It's the best part.
It is pretty fun.
Yeah, no, I like it because of the car. No.
Car's nice. That's a sweet car. No doubt about that.
But there's a lot of action, a lot of humor. The characters are very likable.
And they're well written.
Yeah, they are. They're all definitely well written. But you know, like he says in the clip, people see them as monsters, and so that's the way they've always been treated, whether fairly or unfairly. And as a result, they decided to live up to those standards.
Well, he actually says these are the cards we've been dealt, so we might as well play them, right?
Yeah, exactly.
And so from the movie's perspective, it's talking about, well, people view them that way. These are the expectations set for them in their life, and they're just living up to those or living down to those
living down
expectations.
because they're a bunch of
Because they're
criminals.
thieves.
Yeah, they've robbed banks, as we're going to see in another clip. And it brings up this question, if that is what you're expected to be, do you have to live up to that standard? If you think of the kings of Judah in the Old Testament,
Right.
you had, most of them were bad kings, but you had about 8 of them that were called good kings. And sometimes they were the son of a really bad king.
Right.
And sometimes it was the other way around. So you had a good king who has a son who rebels against that. One king follows the Lord's ways, the other one rebels and disobeys. So they were expected to live a certain way, and they didn't, or vice versa. And it shows that you're not locked into that pattern of what people expect.
So it kind of goes both ways, right? Even from that example to where your nature doesn't determine the outcome of your actions, right? Because it can be good or bad, or from that perspective, or even your environment. You could have a good, like in that example, you could have a good godly example, and yet the son was ungodly. Or sometimes the father was ungodly, and the son turns out to be godly.
Yep.
So the environment doesn't determine.
It can
in a real world
definitely
perspective.
influence it.
Definitely
Yeah.
influence. No doubt
But
about
ultimately, that person has to make that decision. Am I going to live according to God's standards, or am I going to rebel against those standards and do what I want to do? And that does come down to each of us. Now, that might be made easier because of because of the environment, and it's going to be made more difficult because of our nature, because we all
sure.
have a sin nature that
Yeah.
wants to go the wrong way. And so we have to push back against that. And as believers, we're empowered by the Holy Spirit to do that. Now, that doesn't come into play in the film. They don't bring that aspect
Well, not the
into
biblical aspect, but definitely the aspect of environment,
Yes.
how it affects people, expectations, nature. That's all in the film.
A lot of
And
it.
So we're going to take that and really put a biblical worldview on that. Look at it through a biblical grid.
And before we see another clip, one thing that we had talked about covering this season, we had wanted to get into, there's a big trend in Hollywood right now to do like anti-villain or anti-hero stories. So
Oh, sure.
You're supposed to be rooting for Venom, and yet he's not a good
The
guy.
antagonist in Spider-Man, yeah.
Joker. There's all sorts of movies about the villains
Right.
where you're supposed to be feeling sympathetic for them.
Right.
And this movie, it sort of has that feel for a while, but we'll see there's a big difference. So
Yeah.
like, if you're not familiar with the terminology, so an anti-hero is somebody who he lacks the classic hero traits. It's somebody that you are, they're sometimes doing the right thing and you root for them,
Right.
but they're not necessarily a good guy. So maybe the classic example would be like Jack Sparrow.
Yeah, Jack
like who
Sparrow.
doesn't like Jack Sparrow
Yeah, yeah.
in the film, especially in the first one?
Right.
He's very funny and quirky, and you pull for him, but he's still a pirate, and he still just does things for himself, and he's not a good guy.
They're pretty much drunk all the time.
Yes.
Or a more recent example might be Black Adam.
Yeah.
If people have seen that movie where his character is really kind of a villain in different ways, but you're pulling for him because he ends up doing some of the right things, if not for the right motives.
And then on the flip side of that, we have what's called an anti-villain, and that's somebody who is doing the wrong things, even though their motives might not be that bad. And maybe a classic example would be like Thanos in the
Yeah.
Avengers. He thinks he has good motives, and he wants people to live in peace and harmony.
Right.
But in order to accomplish that, he has to kill off half of
Half the
living
population.
creatures and all these different planets. And
Just a
so-
small price to pay, right?
Yes, especially for those that have to
That
die
have
and
to
then
die,
suffer
yes.
through those who live and suffer through the loss of those. So you see that in certain films, and so it's almost like it is what we're seeing from Hollywood a lot of times is this morally gray area where they're
Yeah.
getting you to root for guys that are not very good classic heroes, morally sound characters. You're pulling for people who aren't that great, or actually feel sympathetic to the people who are actually really evil.
And it's almost like they were really trying to push this idea that there's really no right or wrong. It's all based on your context, where you live, when you live, what's happened to you. And it's really based on your context and then your own feelings and your own emotions, which reminds me of the whole theme of Disney, which is follow your heart.
But how can I?
Look inside your heart.
Like if this is true to you, if this is true in your heart, well, then it must just be true.
But if your heart is sinful, as the Bible talks about,
Deceitful and wicked, right?
don't follow that.
Yeah.
And now the reason this movie is different is because there's a redemption arc.
Yep.
It doesn't leave
And
them as
accountability.
criminals.
Yeah.
Yes, they face the music, as we'll see by the end. But in this next clip, we're going to talk about how they're going to talk about how bad habits are hard to break, and it's so important to develop the good habits. But we'll see what happens here. And notice how they're dressed.
Time to launch a charm offensive.
Oh, yeah. The full Clooney.
A nod to Ocean's.
Governor, Diane.
Do not Clooney me, Wolf.
Oh, I see what's going on. You think I'm still a bad guy, trying to bamboozle my way to freedom. But we've changed. That flower of goodness is blossoming all over the place.
Don't you ever get tired of lying?
No. I mean, Fudge, that was a trick question, right?
I gave you an opportunity, a chance to show the world that you're more than just a scary stereotype, but you're too proud or too gutless to take advantage of it.
Gutless? I'm gutless? Oh, I'm sorry. Have we met? I'm the villain of every story. Guilty until proven innocent, even if by some miracle we did change. Who's gonna believe us, huh? Of course you wouldn't know anything about that with your little Miss Perfect power suits.
Is that so?
Wait a second, how did you...
A wolf and a fox are not so different. Maybe they will believe you, maybe they won't, but it doesn't matter. Don't do it for them. Do it for you. This is a chance to write your own story, to find a better life for you and your friends. Come on, what have you got to lose?
I don't know, my dignity?
Yeah, well, that ship has already sailed.
Yeah, it's way gone.
Believe it or not, I'm rooting for you, Wolf.
So you're not gonna call the chief?
I'll see you at the gala.
So there's a lot to unpack there. I mean, you do get a little bit of a nod to the Ocean's 11, where "Don't Clooney me," George Clooney.
George Clooney.
So the
Smooth
full Clooney,
talking,
yeah.
right,
And
basically.
Sam
Yeah.
Rockwell, he's the voice for the wolf. He does a great job. He's fun to
yeah.
listen to. But he talks about the flower of goodness welling up inside him. We'll talk more about that in a little bit because that's one of the themes that's in there. Professor Marmalade, who's you think is
The
a
guinea
good
pig.
character. He's like
Yeah.
he's not the best person in the world. The nicest person in the world would be Mother Teresa. He's a close second. He's like, actually, it's more of a tie.
Yeah, that's what he said.
I guess you flip a coin.
Yeah.
His words. He's very humble as well.
Right, but he says there's a flower of goodness inside all of us just waiting to blossom. And we've already talked about how, we have a sinful heart. It's not, the goodness doesn't come from within us.
Right.
And so the good things that we do, when we do good, that's coming from the Lord.
But even the good things we do, from a biblical perspective, we understand that we're made in God's image, and so we have an inherent understanding of right and wrong, and we can do good things because of that, even though we have a broken, sinful heart. Now, even our good things are covered in our sin nature before we're saved, but still, we're made in God's image, so we understand there is right and wrong,
Yep.
right?
And even wicked people can do good things,
That's
but
right.
it doesn't, to be clear, it doesn't earn them favor with God. They're not, God's not saying, oh, you know what, now I think they can come into heaven because they've done enough good. No, it's not about that. You
Right.
still have sin on your record, and that needs to be wiped clean. You need to be forgiven through faith in Jesus Christ.
That's right.
But they even do, in this film, they even do the example when Marmalade's trying to teach them how to be good. They use the example that I do all the time where even a bad person can help an old lady across the street. And this one, Wolf has to play
They do
the
use
old
that.
lady. It's pretty humorous what happens.
Well, I love the fact the wolf is literally in sheep's clothing.
Yes.
Right? There's got to be some symbolism there, but it's really funny.
Well, and what you see a lot of times is that these characters are not how they appear. So even the governor that he's talking to there,
That's right.
the reason she had the
Spoiler.
ring, that was her ring that he lifted from her the first time they met. He
Right.
stole from her. She knew it, and she let it go, and then she took
Stole
it
it
back without
back.
him
Is it
realizing.
really stealing if you just take it back? It was yours to begin with.
Probably not, but
She snuck it back.
yeah, that's right. And so she's not even what she appears.
Sneaky.
And then what we're going to see is that the wolf in sheep's clothing thing, and even Professor Marmalade. But the Bible tells us, Matthew 7:15, beware of false prophets who come to you in sheep's clothing, but inwardly they're ravenous wolves. Because a lot of times the people who are the most dangerous are the ones who look like they're innocent, and that's why they're able to gather a following and lead people astray.
Which is the case even for this movie.
Yes.
Spoiler alert, but
What?
Marmalade,
I haven't watched it
I
yet.
know, right? But he seems like the good guy. He seems like Mother Teresa, or a version of her, but then he's actually the bad guy, a really bad guy.
Yeah, and
and
we're gonna
ironically,
see-
the bad guys end up being good guys.
Yeah, and we talked about bad habits before that clip, and you noticed it when she's like, "Do you ever get tired of lying?" He's like, "No."
No.
And then he's like, "Whoa, wait."
She will never find out. That's the point of lying.
It's humorous, but yeah, when you're so used to behaving in a certain way, and when you're challenged on something like that, a lot of times your gut instinct, and I would say a lot of times that comes right up from your sin nature, is to try to lie your way out of it. And
sure.
as believers, we have to resist those urges to do the wrong thing and say, no. Yeah, I did make a mistake. Let me own up to that. Let me
That's right.
and turn from that. So he talks about how he's the villain of every story, guilty until proven innocent. And even if they did change by some miracle,
No one would
who would
believe
believe him?
Right.
And her response is great. You don't do it for them. You don't do it for other people. She says, do it for yourself.
Yeah.
And there's a degree in which that's right. Yeah, you do want to do it.
It would benefit
because it's the
him
right thing
to
to
do
do.
good things,
But
no
ultimately,
doubt.
we want to do things because this is what the Lord tells us we should be doing.
Well, I mean, if you think about it, in reality, from a biblical perspective, if you're just doing good things for yourself and not for God, they may have some temporal value, but that's it. But if you're doing your works unto the Lord, they have eternal value.
Right.
That's a totally different level and so much better.
And that's what Colossians 3 tells us, to do all things as unto the
right.
Lord. And there's several passages that speak to that same thing as well. So yeah, she's what he had to lose. I don't know, my dignity. But
No,
if you-
that's gone.
it's funny, but if you think about who he's hung around with, these other bad guys, that's his peer group, and they expect him to be bad.
Right.
And so if he does something good, he's not going to fit in with his crowd anymore. And that's difficult for a lot of people because of whoever you've surrounded yourself with. They expect you to behave in a certain way, and it can be very difficult to break that cycle, even when you know it's the right thing to do.
And it starts to become your identity. And so if you're going to change your habits, that's going to change maybe your group or even your identity, which can be a really scary thing, right?
And what Wolf learns a little bit at the end of the scene when she says, "I'm rooting for you," That's the second time within a few minutes of the film that he's had somebody say something positive to him. He's told by somebody he thinks is an old lady, "Oh, you're such a good boy." And,
His tail starts wagging.
Yeah, he's a dog. So when you tell a dog he's a good boy.
And he's trying to be smooth all the time, so tail wagging is pretty funny.
Right, and you can't control that.
And one thing that I love about that, too, is both from that and then also what she just said to him in that clip that we watched there, you notice the power of her words, the power of words on people. Someone spoke a kind or encouraging word to him, and you could tell by the expression on his face, like, what, really? I mean, it was life-giving.
Yep.
It was challenging his preconceptions even of himself. And it just reminds me of what the Bible tells us, that our words are powerful, right? There's life and death in the power of our tongue. And so to choose our words wisely.
And we need to remember, even though we live in a sarcastic society, and some of my humor. I'm never sarcastic, but that's kind of my brand of humor a lot of times too, is sarcasm. But we're supposed to be building.
I haven't noticed.
I'm picking up your sarcasm.
Well, I should hope so, because I'm laying it on pretty thick.
We're supposed to be building one another up, and as believers, we should be speaking encouragement. We all know people like that who just encourage people all the time, and I work with somebody who encourages everybody all the time.
We got the same guy in mind, probably.
Yes. And it's great to be around when somebody is always encouraging.
Absolutely.
And so think about how you speak to one another and be ready to give that encouraging word, because we can put on a front that, oh, we don't need that. But we all want to hear that. We all like that. It's a lot better than being torn down all the time.
Oh, absolutely.
And sometimes we can just have overly critical spirit. So let's focus on making sure we're encouraging one another to do good works.
And that doesn't mean we don't speak truth to people when they need to hear hard truth, but we do it in love, with a loving attitude, with the hope to encourage them to be more like Christ within a Christian setting, right? If they're non-believer, hopefully they get saved to eternal salvation in Christ. And so our motive should be always out of love for people and their best interest.
Right.